Throughout the last several decades, there has been a rising push towards decolonizing the creation of knowledge in African countries. This movement acknowledges that the Western paradigm of knowledge production, which was established during the time of colonialism, has marginalized and erased African knowledge and methods of knowing. This movement is called decolonization because it recognizes that the Western paradigm of knowledge production has done this. As a result, there is a need to build an approach to the development of knowledge focused on Africa and founded in the settings and values of the local community. In this chapter, we dive into the historical foundations of Western knowledge creation in Africa, evaluate the rationale for an African-centered approach to knowledge production, and investigate the possible influence that this method may have on African scholarship and the academic community. This chapter examines the problem of decolonizing knowledge production in Africa. It does this by arguing in favor of an approach to knowledge generation that is centered on Africa. It argues that the Western paradigm of knowledge production has historically marginalized and erased African knowledge and methods of knowing, and that there is a need to identify and appreciate various forms of African knowledge. In addition, it asserts that there is a need to recognize and value African intellectual traditions. In this chapter, Western epistemology, notably its positivist assumptions and preference for abstract and universality over context and particularity, is analyzed and contrasted with an approach to the creation of knowledge oriented on Africa. In addition, this chapter addresses the possible influences that an approach focused on Africa may have on African research and institutions, including the possibilities of modifying curricula and pedagogy to create more inclusion and local relevance. Simply put, this chapter aims to argue for a critical rethinking of the creation of knowledge in Africa, one that recognizes and honors the diversity of viewpoints and methods of knowing. Historical roots of Western knowledge production in Africa. The historical roots of Western knowledge production in Africa have had far-reaching impacts on the continent, shaping how knowledge is produced and valued and how African societies are perceived and understood. These impacts have had a profound effect on the development of the continent. African knowledge systems have been relegated to the status of folklore, superstition, or mere curiosity due to the imposition of Western epistemological frameworks on African societies. This has had the effect of erasing and marginalizing African knowledge systems. This has resulted in detrimental effects on the cultures and identities of African people, in addition to inhibiting the growth of African societies. The production of Western knowledge in Africa has also been characterized by preference of abstract, universalized knowledge, which frequently ignores or minimizes the importance of local contexts and particularities. This has been one of the defining characteristics of Western knowledge production in Africa. Because of this, a situation has arisen in which knowledge developed in Western contexts is frequently imposed on African societies without sufficient consideration of the particular requirements, ideals, and goals of those societies. As a consequence of this, African societies are frequently regarded as passive recipients of knowledge produced elsewhere rather than as active participants in the production and dissemination of knowledge. This perception has led to a situation in which African societies are frequently perceived as being underdeveloped. The legacy of Western knowledge creation in Africa has not only had positive consequences for Western scholarship, but it has also had detrimental ramifications for African academic institutions. Because of this, African academics and institutions have often been excluded from or marginalized within global networks of knowledge creation, which has hampered their ability to gain reputation, resources, and influence. Because of this, African knowledge and perspectives are frequently regarded as being on the periphery of or irrelevant to mainstream academic discourse. This has had the effect of further marginalizing African scholarship and perpetuating Western dominance. There has been a growing movement towards decolonizing African knowledge production to address these challenges. This involves challenging the dominance of Western epistemology and methods and reclaiming African knowledge and methods of knowing as valid and valuable sources of knowledge. To address these challenges, there has been a growing movement towards decolonizing African knowledge production. This requires acknowledging the richness and complexity of African knowledge systems and appreciating the role of local people and cultures in creating knowledge. Employing an African-centered approach to knowledge creation has potential to improve African institutions' curriculum and pedagogy, enabling more inclusion and local relevance. Toyin Falola at the 54th Convocation Lecture at the University of Lagos in January 2024. Kamga calls on African educational institutions to consider the understanding, not the practice, of esoteric knowledge, which was otherwise eclipsed by the interception of colonial educational systems. An African-centered approach to knowledge creation requires rethinking how information is produced, communicated, and evaluated, as well as supporting a more collaborative and participatory approach to the creation of knowledge. African researchers and institutions may play a vital part in this process by supporting multidisciplinary and cross-cultural cooperation and creating creative approaches and frameworks that represent the complexity and variety of African society. However, there are challenges and risks associated with taking an approach to knowledge production in the academy centered on Africa. The danger of essentializing or romanticizing African cultures and identities, which can lead to the reproduction of stereotypes and myths, is one of the major challenges that must be overcome. As a result of the possibility that distinct communities and groups in African civilizations may have knowledge claims that compete with one another or are in direct opposition to one another, there is a further difficulty associated with the situation. In addition, there is the possibility of resistance from inside the academic community, where established power structures and interests may oppose attempts to decolonize the creation of knowledge. It is possible to overestimate the significance of the role that colonialism and imperialism plays in laying the foundation for the prevailing epistemic framework in Africa. The individuals who did the colonizing carried with them their worldviews and epistemologies, both of which they subsequently imposed on the people who were colonized. Not only was there a bodily compulsion, but there was also an intellectual and cultural one. As a result, they began the process of destroying the pre-existing African knowledge systems and constructing their own in their place. The colonizers thought that the African methods of knowing were subpar and that they needed to be replaced with the more sophisticated and scientific knowledge systems of the West. This view had its origin in the presumption that the only way to know anything was through the conduct of empirical observation and experimentation, and that African knowledge was founded on superstition and tradition rather than on the results of scientific investigation. As a result, they began eradicating African knowledge and methods of knowing to replace them with Western knowledge systems. Education was one of the methods through which colonialism and imperialism built their hegemonic epistemic framework in Africa. In Africa, Education in European style was introduced, and the curriculum was designed to teach European knowledge systems and ways of thinking.
Ekabo, welcome to the African Bookscape, a series from both TF Interviews and the Pan-African University Press. This is a place where knowledge walks and stories speak. I'm Toyin Falola. Here we breathe live into the books shaping African thought and global discourse. We speak with the writers, listen to the words between the lines, and journey through ideas that carry our histories and our futures. As we say in Swahili, which I'm translating into English, true wisdom lives within the story. Come, let us lift the tale. Come, let us begin. Here in your kingdom, the Kamga Empire, conducting this interview at your own front, and I'll be careful not to get into trouble. Congratulations on publishing this fine book. It's very impressive in its production, in the content and everything. You know, there is a proverb in Cameroon when they said, "What is the teacher doing climbing the palm wine tree?" Supposed to be holding a chalk, not putting a calabash guard to collect palm wine. What I mean by that is you're a lawyer, human rights attorney. What are you doing with this Trempo School Science book?
Well, sir, thank you very much. Thank you so much, first of all, for visiting the University of the Free State, for coming to the Faculty of Law, for agreeing to do the lecture that you will do tonight. And
I still can change my mind.
No, I hope you will not change your mind. But and also thank you for accepting our honorary doctorate.
I will use that to get a new job in Johannesburg.
I don't think so. Thank you so much and for the opportunity to discuss the book with you. To come back to your question, how a lawyer, a human rights lawyer, is able to work on issues of Africa studies, development, history, and others. Well, I will say I was very privileged because when I was doing my PhD thesis, I was working on development, but as a human rights, and I was looking at the right to development in the African context. And at the time, NEPA, the New Partnership for Africa's Development, was really up and running. So I tried to analyze whether NEPA as a framework could be the roadmap to the achievement of the right to development in Africa. And the study, when one works on the right to development, you have to touch on various subjects: African history, international law, international relations, political sciences. So it's because the right to development itself, it's I will say multifaceted human right that touch on international relations, international law, human rights law per se, and development studies issues. So that kind of prepared me to not only read law or legal materials, but to also look into development studies, development issues, policies, in various frameworks. That enabled me then to broaden my horizon behind just being a lawyer.
That is impressive. Well, I think law, like history, is also multidisciplinary. I don't think anybody can be a good lawyer without understanding context, political science, sociology, and things like that. But you could have chosen Samira Me, or Dani, or many others. How did you now encounter Falola's work?
Yes.
Which enables you, because it's a lot of work.
Yes.
Writing a book of 100 pages. How did you encounter his scholarship?
Oh, thank you for the question, and it gives me an opportunity, first of all, to thank you for the body of work that you have produced. Well, to encounter your work, well, I was fortunate when we met at my previous work, the NISA,
at the school. You were then teaching political talk.
Yes, and I was mandated to amongst other things, I was teaching thought leadership for Africa's development, and I was equally mandated to develop a curriculum by my then boss and brother, Professor Lucy Gumede, who said to me, try and develop the curriculum. And you were many members of the International Advisory Committee.
I remember that great moment.
Yes. Then in the process of developing this, I interacted with you. You were sending me your work, a lot of things that you have worked on, and you were guiding me in developing this curriculum. Now, on the side, as I was putting together the curriculum framework, I was also kind of highlighting thematics of your work. So, initially planning to do an essay on your work, but I end up having so many things, so much of your work, that I was able now to put it together in the form, analyze, interpret, comment, discuss in the form of the book that we have today. But I will again give you a lot of credit, because in the process of writing the book, I remember that I used to call you at 1 o'clock South African time, which was basically in the morning for you in Austin.
My wife was not complaining.
Yes. Yes. But generally, at that time, you were doing your work in the morning.
Yes.
And I will be discussing ideas, and saying, do you really mean this? What do you mean with that?
So this afternoon, I'm talking about law.
Yeah.
And you are talking about culture, history in my book.
Yeah.
So exactly what you did is also what I'm doing. I'm not a lawyer, but I will be talking about law.
Yeah.
Of course, I have a previous law degree. So the lesson for this, especially for younger people, is that they can cross-fertilize. They can broaden their intellectual ideas.
Yes.
That you have a degree in political science doesn't mean you cannot understand law. So, if a student were to ask you, I know you are showing them this book this evening, if they say, is this book relevant to legal studies, what will you say?
Yes, it's a very, very, very important question. It is very, very relevant to legal studies, because in the book, when you discuss the issue of colonialism, coloniality, decolonization, imperialism, in the legal discourse, all this is framed under the concept of the third world approach to international law, which seeks to show that the third world is not a bundu with no history, with no law, with no custom. For instance, in the book, there is, I think, chapter 11 that speaks on transforming knowledge, revisiting our indigenous knowledge system. How can we tap into it? Now, from a legal perspective, to what extent are Africans using African legal scholars, theorists? We will always be talking in all our theories about scholars like, I will say, Montesquieu, Immanuel Kant, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Saint Thomas d'Aquin. So all these are Western luminaries. But now, why are we not also talking about our own luminaries, our own scholars, to tap into the theories that has been established? Why don't we look at Ubuntu, for instance, at the law? We say, why don't we use methods like the gachacha that helped Rwanda to reconcile and have another way of doing things? Why should we have to import everything without tapping into local realities? We have what we call in the law faculty customary law. But this is vis-a-vis Roman-Dutch law. Every law student will start by Roman-Dutch law, will be learning Latin as a language for law. But now, through the Department of Language Study and Multilingualism at the university, we are now putting together like a dictionary of Lesotho terms. It should be in Sotho to be able to speak and teach our students while also putting together indigenous knowledge systems so that the people and the population can really own the discourse, not simply rely on Western input. When we talk of decolonizing the curriculum, which is part of the analysis in this book, we cannot be talking of decolonizing the curriculum from a legal perspective without interrogating what is there, how did it come about, and how can we really decolonize or Africanize the curriculum, to use the word of Professor Rumede, who said we should also consider African epistemology in everything that we do. So as lawyers, we cannot stay away from the conversation.
On that note, I'm very grateful for this interview. I know this is your convocation week. It's been very busy for you, and I look forward to speaking with your faculty in a few hours' time. Thank you very much.
I am grateful, sir. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for the conversation with you. And again, I appreciate your work that enabled me to put together this book. Thank you, sir.
We thank you for working with us on the African Bookscape. May these voices linger like old songs and awaken new visions. I'm Toyin Falola. Until we meet again, keep reading, keep asking, for in Africa, the story never ends. It only deepens. It is the word that provokes, not the noise. Thank you.